Okay, we're going to get underway. So first, I'd like to welcome everyone who has joined us tonight. Thank you so much for being here. My name is John Rosenberg, and I'm the CEO of Hebrew Public. I want to welcome both our returning families, those who are finishing out the school year with us, as well as families who've newly applied to and been accepted to one of our 3 New York schools. I also want to introduce my fellow panelists. Again, I'm John Rosenberg. I'm the CEO of Hebrew Public, which is the network that manages Hebrew Language Academy in Mill Basin, Brooklyn, HLA2 in Gravesend, Brooklyn, and Harlem Hebrew in Harlem. With me tonight also is Emily Fernandez, our Chief Schools Officer, who's waving, and Jonathan Worley, our Chief Operating Officer. It has been a really, really challenging year. We know for all of you, for our schools, for our community, for our city, for our whole world. We recently shared an written update with families and invited questions. We've received a number. We want to thank all of those who've submitted good questions for us to respond to today. A couple of framing points about what we're going to do tonight. First, because we have parents from all 3 of our New York City schools with us tonight, family members from all 3 schools, we're going to be answering questions that are generally applicable to all 3 schools. In many cases, these are questions about COVID and safety procedures and things like that. If you asked a question in an email to us, or if you submit a question in the chat tonight that's specific to your child's school, we commit that we will answer your question, but we're probably not going to answer it tonight in this forum. We want to really reserve this so that everybody with us tonight benefits from answers that apply to all 3 schools. Again, feel free to submit questions that are school specific. We will be responding to those questions in writing next week. In addition, a recording of tonight's session will be made available in the next few days. So anyone who wasn't able to listen, or if you want to listen to it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. And we're going to be sending an updated frequently asked questions with answers document out next week. And again, that will include school specific answers where questions were raised that are specific to one of the 3 New York City schools. I want to take a moment to just recap some of what we've faced and what we've done as a small but scrappy network of schools in the last, I think it's now probably 16 months since this pandemic started. Back in March of 2020, we executed a very rapid shift to remote learning, distributing food in the initial weeks, distributing Chromebooks to every family, ensuring that everyone had internet connection and could participate in remote learning. And we're proud of the way we were able to roll that out quickly. And then, as it was something new really to our schools and almost all of the other schools in the country, we really made efforts to get better at it every week. And we think we showed substantial improvement over the course of last spring. Moving into this year, we offered 2 distinct programs to families and more than one choice point during the year about choosing either a fully remote program or a hybrid learning program. Wherever we could, we kept our schools open for in-person learning. There were instances, including for a period of months, where we had no choice but to close them due to rising cases both within our local communities and citywide as the pandemic raged for a period of time and only recently has begun to subside. Where we've had hybrid, we've offered anywhere from 2 days to 4 days a week of in-person learning, depending on the configuration of our buildings and the availability of different staff. We made some choices that I think were really important ones. We did not, in our remote learning program, have children simply watching what was going on in the classroom where other children were learning in an in-person context. Instead, our program team made the hard choice to invest deeply in staffing so that we could staff 2 separate programs, one group of teachers serving remote, another group serving hybrid. And we think the benefits of that really happened, were demonstrated over the course of this year. We did site-based COVID testing. And among other things that we did, projects and virtual field trips and the like, we were the only charter schools in New York City to ensure that childcare was provided and heavily subsidized by us based on family need for children in our hybrid program on the days when they could not be in school, so that families, parents, adults, guardians were able to go to work and children would have a safe place to learn, even on those days when they couldn't be in our buildings. As we look to this coming summer, we are keenly aware of the kinds of learning gaps and social gaps that children will have experienced across all ages. And we're offering small group tutoring to families whose children have been identified as having substantial academic needs. We're providing subsidized camp programming, and in some cases free camp programs for new students and returning students. And we're providing counseling to students in situations where they really have emotional or mental health needs or trauma-based needs relating to everything that's happened in the last 15 or 16 months. A couple of other introductory remarks. I want to note that this world that we're in now with the pandemic, that the answers that we give you tonight are subject to change. New guidance emerges. The path of the virus changes over a period of months. Again, we think now that it is diminishing. If that were to change, then some of the answers that we'll be sharing with you tonight in the coming weeks may themselves differ. Some of the answers that we'll be sharing with you around safety protocols and health protocols may change because they may go away. Things may get easier and return even more fully to normal. The most important thing I want to share with you is that we intend to return as many children as we can to full-time schooling come September, meaning 5 days a week, 180-day calendar, in school for the full day, with a teacher, with their peers. And we are confident that unless something dramatically changes in the course of the virus, that's what we'll be able to do. As we go through our presentation tonight and answer your questions, you should feel free to submit additional questions if you haven't had a chance to email your question in using the Zoom chat function. We will not be responding to those questions on chat, but my colleague Elise Castellano, our Chief of Staff, will be noting all of those questions, and then we'll have a chance to look at them after we've answered the first batch of questions that were emailed to us. And from there, we'll reserve some time to try to answer some of the questions that come in tonight on the chat. Again, you'll also have the opportunity to have those questions answered in writing at a later date if we aren't able for any reason to get to it tonight. So thank you for listening to that intro. Let's dive right in now to the substance of some of the questions you've been asking. And we're going to start with questions about vaccination. I want to state at the outset that I know that for many people, vaccination may be seen as controversial. They may have distrust or fear or questions about whether vaccinations are the right path to go. We have a particular opinion about this as an organization that is grounded in looking at evidence and weighing different sources of information and thinking about data. And our position as an organization is we strongly encourage vaccination. There are obviously exceptions under the law and in terms of public health exceptions for people with particular kinds of health conditions. In some cases, people may have deeply felt religious objections, but for the vast majority of people, as their age group becomes eligible for vaccination, we strongly encourage that folks take advantage of that, not only for their own health and safety, but for the health and safety of our school communities and the world itself, until we reach what is called herd immunity, meaning at least 70% of a given population vaccinated or otherwise immune to the virus. We all really continue to be at some level of risk. And so just want to put in that word of encouragement. One of the questions that's come in from a number of sources is, will students be required to be vaccinated against COVID? We do not think that there will be student vaccination requirements at the state level or the federal level in the near future. Any decisions about whether student vaccination will be required will be similar to longstanding determinations about other kinds of vaccinations for children. In other words, those decisions will be made at a state level by the State Department of Health and the State Department of Education in consultation with the federal government, and we'll follow those. As of now, this moment in time, there is no requirement for students to be vaccinated. Again, as an organizational policy matter, we encourage all eligible folks to get vaccinated. Another question that came in was about the status of our staff, the 200 plus school-based staff in Hebrew Public's 3 New York schools. Where are we in terms of staff vaccination? currently, in the most recent time we've checked in on these data is about a week and a half ago. And so the numbers we hope will have ticked up a little bit since then. About 65% of our school-based staff are vaccinated. Another substantial number of staff have shared with us that they have plans to do so, although had not done so as of about a week and a half ago. We have been engaged in an internal public awareness campaign with our staff and actually with some families also. Some of you attended a town hall presentation where we had 2 public health experts speak to the safety and effectiveness of the vaccines. So we've been strongly encouraging staff to get vaccinated, and our hope is that over the coming weeks, more of them will do so. Another question that came in related to vaccination has to do with whether we will require school staff to be vaccinated. This is a tough one. Like many organizations, including, by the way, lots of hospitals and medical centers and school districts, we are, like them, wrestling with the question of whether it is the right thing to do to require vaccination as a condition of employment. Up until now, we've been requiring that staff share with us their vaccination status and their plans. We've also, as I noted a moment ago, been strongly encouraging them to get vaccinated and sharing information with them. In the next 2 weeks, we will be discussing with each of the schools' boards, each of our schools is governed by a nonprofit board, whether the boards and Hebrew Public together want to move towards requiring vaccinations for all staff. In addition, and of course, once we've made that decision, whether we go in that direction or not, if we don't, the decision can and is likely to be revisited in the coming weeks thereafter. But I want to remind everyone that even before the vaccines were available, our adherence to health and safety protocols has been really serious. The level of staff training that our operations and program staff have put in place at the school level, the level of support that you families have provided in terms of ensuring social distancing and that your children really take mask wearing seriously. As a result of that, while we have had COVID cases in our schools, we have had zero evidence of COVID spreading within our schools. So someone might come into one of our school buildings who's contracted COVID somewhere else. It is not spreading in our schools, and we really are going to continue to provide the kind of environment where it is unlikely to do so. That is always a risk, but it is unlikely to do so. One other point here before we turn over to the next section. In situations where unvaccinated staff are working in our buildings, unless we go the vaccination requirement, as long as we have unvaccinated staff, they will wear masks, and they will wear those masks even if at some point the mask wearing requirement gets lifted as a general matter for folks who are vaccinated. So again, I don't want to confuse things here. We are still requiring masks to be worn by everyone indoors. We are still intending to require that come September, unless state guidance changes. But even if the mask wearing requirement gets relaxed, unvaccinated staff will still wear masks, at least for the first part of the year, or until such time as COVID really fades away. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jonathan Worley. Again, he's our Chief Operating Officer, to answer some of your questions about COVID testing and screening. Jonathan?
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. Yeah, as John said, I'm going to address some questions about COVID testing and some other questions that have come in general about health and safety, and particularly about our COVID protocols for the coming year. I do want to start by saying the New York State Department of Health has recently issued some updated guidance, and they continue to update guidance, as John mentioned, on a pretty regular basis, where they have outlined requirements for schools and recommendations for best practices regarding COVID protocols. Wherever they've identified a requirement, Hebrew public schools will be in compliance. Wherever they have identified a recommendation or an optional practice, we are going to be considering options and applying what works best for our schools and what we feel is creating that safe environment that John was referring to. And again, as John mentioned, in all cases, we're going to be keeping our eye on what is an ever-changing, ever-evolving set of recommendations and guidance from both federal and state sources. To start, so COVID testing, we've had some questions about what are we going to be doing about COVID testing. As of now, COVID testing for both students and staff is still being recommended by the State Department of Health. We have had a system in place where we've been doing testing. At this point, we are planning to continue that, at least in the fall. Some questions came in about how often are we going to be doing it? Are we going to stick to the same cadence that we've been at? We're going to make that decision over the summer, the frequency decision over the summer. And again, that's going to be very informed by what kind of guidance we're getting, what the conditions are in our communities. Some other questions that have come in, folks have asked about social distancing and how we're going to be approaching that in our schools. We are currently required to follow a minimum of 3-foot social distancing between students and 6-foot social distancing between students and adults. We are assessing the configuration of and sizes of our classrooms to really ensure that we can accommodate that. But as John said, our goal is to get as many students into our schools as we can. So we're working towards that. We don't have a definitive answer for all of our schools and all of our classrooms yet. Some questions came in about busing and social distancing. We do work primarily with the city's Office of Pupil Transportation, which is referred to as OPT. With a couple private bus companies, we will follow the clear guidance and the guidelines that OPT issues around the number of students that can ride on a bus, and they will be following the rules of OPT around social distancing on a bus and mask wearing. Some questions came up about chaperones on buses. We don't know yet if and which buses will have a chaperone. I will say these have been very difficult roles to fill for us. And so while we would love to say we can do that, we don't know yet if that's going to be a possibility. John mentioned masks. There is still a mandate from the state health department to wear masks, and our plan is to comply with that. That is indoors. Mask wearing is not required outdoors, and there may be some situations where we do require outdoor mask wearing, but generally speaking, that is an area where students won't be required to wear masks. You may have seen some guidance come out that says there's been a relaxing of mask wearing guidance from the state. That unfortunately really been applied to camps. They have said camps can relax those guidelines, but they have not applied that to schools. And it's confusing, but at this point, we are mandated to have everyone in the school building wearing a mask at all times, with some exceptions, of course, like eating lunches, eating meals, and so on. Temperature checks. So people asked, are we going to continue with our temperature checks? As of now, for both students and staff, the State Department of Health is still requiring temperature checks. And so unless we get new advice on this or new guidance on this, we will continue to do that, at least for the beginning of the school year, likely in the same way that we have at the front door as kids come in. It's been efficient. So, we found that it's not creating a bottleneck. And so we are happy to keep doing it. But if the guidance changes, we will consider changing as well. Some other questions have come in about kind of what our response will be if we have positive cases. We are going to, as I've been saying all along, we're going to continue to follow state and federal guidelines around this. And the truth is we're going to continue to follow the practices that we have had to date, which is, at a high level, if we have a student or a staff member who tests positive, they will be told to isolate. That is the guidance that the state and the city give whenever there's a positive test. And we will do our due diligence in doing contact tracing within the school. And if we find that there are people who have been potentially exposed, we will follow guidelines around asking those people to quarantine, students and staff, for the guided amount of time. At this point, that is 10 days. If there's been exposure, 10 days without any symptoms, then students and staff can return. In all those cases, if a classroom, for example, is required to quarantine, we'll shift to remote learning for that period of time. I do want to note that a positive test no longer means that there will be definitive school closure. We are going to be looking at, as we have at the end of this current school year, we're going to be looking at it at a case-by-case basis. We have no intention of just closing schools down when we have a positive test. It will really depend on the nature of the community around us and the number of cases in the school. But we're going to do that in partnership with the City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and won't just be reacting by closing schools. A couple questions came in around ventilation. Want to just look back to the beginning of the pandemic when we did some very substantial ventilation and filtration work. In collaboration with engineers, we did a lot of work on our HVAC systems, including upgrading or in some cases replacing the systems altogether. And we're also currently constantly monitoring the functioning of our HVAC systems in our schools, and have a lot of confidence that there's good airflow, good air pull from the outside, and good filtration in all of our schools. And so we feel like at this point, at this moment, we have really as good an environment as we can have in regards to ventilation. Cleaning, some folks have asked about cleaning. We are going to continue to implement our really thorough cleaning processes and protocols. That includes extensive cleaning every night, attention to high touch areas. The truth is, we know that COVID is less likely to spread through surface touching, but the other truth is, good, clean schools is not a bad thing. And, so we've got these protocols in place. We're going to continue them. We're going to continue to do deep cleaning and disinfection, and just make sure we really do have a clean, healthy environment. Finally, we have received some questions about qualification for what qualification for a remote offering might look like in the coming year. As John mentioned, our aim really is to open our schools with as close to normal, with as many students as possible learning in our school buildings. That's our ideal. However, there are potentially some medical conditions that might require that we make exceptions to that. We're going to be following state and federal guidelines on this, and we will be developing a strict set of qualifications, and we're going to share that out in the coming weeks. So if you think you have a student who might qualify for medical reasons, we'll give some guidance in the coming weeks on how to request or inquire about that. And
Jonathan,
that,
thank you. Let me add a little bit on this remote learning question also. Kids whose families have opted for remote learning, often for reasons that make perfect sense, have now not been in a school building since March, I think it's 13th or 12th of 2020. There continues to emerge new and frankly very worrisome evidence that the impact of that on children's social development and on their academic learning is profound. We obviously are schools of choice. No one is compelled to come to one of our schools. We very much want each of you to stay with us if you're already a member of our community, or to join us if you've been newly admitted. But we cannot, in good faith, continue to provide two fully staffed, distinct programs. The money isn't there to have two entirely different sets of faculty. And the alternative, which is to have children kind of webcast into a room where most of the other students are there in person, is simply not effective instructionally. It might work in a college seminar or that kind of context. It does not work with kids in the grades K through 8 that we are serving across these three schools. We are going to have a small number of staff across the network of teachers dedicated to serving a small remote academy. Again, you'll have an opportunity to submit an application with justifications for why you think that's needed for your child. In most instances, those justifications, in order to be approved, will need to really relate to specific health and safety concerns. I hate to be a wet blanket for anyone who's really counting on this. We understand how you feel about it. Part of our network's ethos is to try to put ourselves in other folks' shoes and see what the world might look like through their eyes. But we're just not going to be doing this again at any kind of large scale. We really need to concentrate on a compelling, effective, fully staffed in-person offering. We, again, firmly believe that most children need to be back in school and will benefit from it, and we'll have exceptions, but a limited number of them based on individual family circumstances. Okay, let's move along to some additional questions, and we're actually going to pivot a little bit to some that are actually not necessarily COVID related. So I'll turn it over to my colleague, Emily Fernandez, our wonderful Chief Schools Officer.
Thank you, John, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for making the time to be with us tonight. We appreciate you. So my name is Emily Fernandez. I'm the Chief Schools Officer. I work directly with each of our heads of school, each of our principals, and support, coach, and manage them as they manage their schools for you all. I want to share a few highlights from the questions that we received. And I'm going to start with just some logistics around what the school schedule or year-long calendar will look like. So our year-long calendar was first shared with our returning families in April, and we will be sharing it again directly following this recording when we send out our follow-up memo. As a usual year, there will be at least 180 days. We usually bake in 1 or 2 days to account for potential snow days, which I'm actually going to touch on in a moment. School year will start on September 1st for key grades. So our kindergartners are going to come in on September 1st, get kind of reacclimated to school. Our first grade of middle schoolers, they're going to come in, kind of get reset for middle school. And then everyone will come in the building on September 2nd for our first full day of school. We did choose to start prior to Labor Day this year, just thinking about the way holidays and other days off stack up in the month of September, and that we haven't had all of our kids in the building in so long. We wanted to get a jump on the year and get started as soon as possible. We will largely be following the DOE in terms of breaks. So in terms of Christmas or Thanksgiving, what's traditionally seen as like the Easter Passover break, these breaks, we're largely going to be following the DOE, and you'll see that in the calendar. There's some minor adjustments where we've either added a holiday or removed a day to account for scheduling. But for the most part, it's pretty standard. And the school day itself is also shifting back to what we are familiar with for a regular school year. So doors are going to open at arrival at 7:50, potentially 7:45 for bussers, or depending on your school logistics exactly. Instruction will start right at 8 a.m. And so of course we always want to partner with families to get as many kids in the door by 7:59 or earlier. Dismissal will start at 3:30, with the exception of Fridays, which we've also been sharing about. Fridays, we're doing a dismissal at 1 p.m. and we're really prioritizing some pretty intensive professional development for our school staff on those Friday afternoons. We just know that in order for teachers and our social workers and our intensive teachers to do all of the support that is going to be needed this coming year based on the time away from school that kids have experienced, we know that that extra training is really going to be critical. A note on that, in addition to any other after school programming that your school might offer Monday through Thursday, be it led by the school teachers or led by a partner organization like King in Harlem, we are also going to be offering specific aftercare on Fridays. We understand that a 1 p.m. dismissal is earlier than the normal school day dismissal of 3:30. And so we want to make sure that any families that are struggling with that around childcare have access to that. And we are going to be looking at subsidizing that and making sure that families are able to access that. Okay, I'm going to shift a bit here to our snow day policy. So 1 or 2 questions came in about that. Prior to COVID, I want to say that any of our snow days just followed the DOE. And so if the DOE closed their school for snow days and everyone had off, families and teachers and students, no school, there was no school. With the start of remote learning and the coronavirus, we also followed to one degree or another what the DOE did, New York City Department of Education, and we provided remote learning during those days, particularly during stretches where we were already remote and providing remote learning all day long, every day. It really felt like we didn't want to lose a day during that time. We are currently looking at past policies, current policies, getting input from a number of stakeholders and peer organizations, and developing our snow day policy for next year. There's a variety of perspectives on this. On the one hand, folks feel really passionately about snow days and the joy it brings to kids. On the other hand, I think every family is trying to get as much possible education for each child available. And so we're just going to look at all those considerations, as well as access, and making sure that our kids, if we do have instruction on those days, have access to that at home, and that our families are prepared. But we're working through what that might look like and whether or not we would close for a snow day, provide a modified set of instruction or activities for students, or some combination of that. And so you can expect that we will share that in early August with an update around just the coming school year, but we are looking at that. I'm going to jump to our school programming before I shift a little bit and just reiterate a few key points. So school programming. Some folks have asked, how is school going to be reimagined, right? We've had this time period, we've had to be flexible. What is school going to look like in terms of how we support kids? So a number of core practices that we just think are excellent, we're going to maintain. Some of our curricula, Eureka, expeditionary learning, our readers writers workshop, all these things that have been proven, have been researched and really shown that they spark children's learning and growth, we're going to maintain. We're also going to take some of our learnings from this time. So I think the adults on this call can relate to this, that this time period has made all of us have to be more tech savvy than we were necessarily before, and the education sector is no exception. Everyone was always talking about educational technology, but not necessarily maximizing what was out there. We learned a lot about learning platforms, specifically online learning platforms, and how we could differentiate those and target individual student need. And so we are going to be pulling that into the building. This is not to say that every class period your child is going to be on a computer. That will not be the case. However, we are going to have key periods where we do engage kids in some differentiated online learning platform practice over the course of a given week. So that's one thing that we learned from, and we want to pull into our practice and not leave just because we don't have to use it. We are also going to be looking at how we target students and really know their individual data. Our children are at a wide variety of places in terms of what their growth has been during this time. You know, for the majority of kids, as John mentioned, remote learning has not been everything that in-person has been. And there's a small exception of kids who've really flourished. And so we know that our kids are going to come in a variety of places. We need to really clearly understand where they're at. Our teachers are going to be data whizzes, and then we need to respond to them in the moment. And so a big focus of that is going to be, coaching students, individual conferences, as well as looking at where we already have small group in the day, be it guided reading or number stories. Sometimes we add a small group in there, our math blocks, and where we can enhance and then add on even more. And so this is always, I think, a juggle of getting, kids paired with the right teacher and the schedule, but we're really looking at how we meet kids where they are and then move them forward. One other thing that you'll note, as I hope that you experienced over this time, we really leaned into some of our community building practices. So we always maintain morning meeting and advisory to start our day with kids, whether they were in the building or remote. We included remote community meetings. Even today's Wednesday, our remote day, and I saw updates from a number of our deans of culture about hope to see you on our community meeting Zoom, which is always fascinating to me. Large number of kids and really building this beautiful moment. We want to keep that coming into the building, and we're bringing back some things that we really loved about our in-person program, including alarm hour and more opportunities for children to explore themselves and each other and get to know the beautiful communities that make up our school. So we're excited to do that in person. We know that there's an element of connection that is lost when we're not in the same room. And so we're eager to get back there. Just to reiterate a few things, again, first day of school for key grades will be September 1st. First day of school for all grades will be September 2nd. This will be included in writing to follow up. And our start times might vary slightly by school, and so you'll get that specific, but it would either be 7:40, 7:45, or the latest would be 7:50, okay, varying by campus. And so you'll get that in your follow-up message, and instruction at all three of our schools start at 8 a.m. Okay, John, I hand it back to you.
Thank you, Emily. A lot of topics covered there, and hopefully folks, some of your questions were answered. Again, changing gears substantially, anyone who's been in this country for the last year, 2, 5, 10 years has seen increasing polarization, where it sometimes feels like we're members of different tribes in some way, people of really different views of the world, really different political belief sets, in some cases different value sets. And so a couple of the questions we got had to do with things like critical race theory, or whether we're going to be teaching about polarizing or politically charged topics. So I do want to take a moment to address this, and I'm mindful that it's hard to even talk about without folks maybe getting angry or feeling like they're not hearing what they want to hear. So let me just state this as clearly as I can. First, we're running public schools. Our public schools, although they're charter schools, are public schools and are required to cover a wide range of topics as part of New York State's academic standards. Those standards are organized by subject and grade, and they include social studies, and they include a social studies set of topics that we're required to cover. In some instances, those topics are complex, and we do our best to teach them adhering to the best standards of education, of pedagogy. Our schools are grounded in values that families who've been with us for a couple of years know that we rolled out about 2 years ago, the Hebrew word for world, olam, which we use as an acronym, where the O is outstanding problem solving, L for lifelong learning, A for aware communication, and M for making a difference. Those values inform how we do everything in our schools, including how we teach. We do not believe in indoctrinating children. We do believe that children need to develop critical thinking skills, empathy, the ability to communicate across cultures or across difference. Our schools have always been designed to be diverse and to welcome people from different backgrounds. And we believe that children, especially as they get older, need to be able to look at complex issues from different points of view. That's how we think about it. And we don't think about that under the umbrella of something, whether it's critical race theory or some other theory or conservative or liberal. It's not how we view the world or our role as educators. Our school leaders and teachers will be available, as they always are, during the school year to answer any questions families might have about a specific unit or a specific subject that's being discussed or how it's being taught. But I did want to articulate what our core approach is to how we teach. Emily, you may want to give an example in social studies context of how we approach this.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is so important, and there's a good number of studies around the neuroscience of debate and discussion and disagreement and how it actually builds brain cells. Many of our teachers do this beautifully, and it's something we're going to continue to support them on. I think of one teacher at Harlem Hebrew, Miss Stephanie, who has 9, 10, 11-year-olds disagreeing and debating about current events in class while maintaining a safe and neutral environment. So she herself does not come out and say, you are right, you are wrong. She doesn't see that as her role, but she encourages the debate. She encourages the discussion. She asks them to ground it in facts, and they talk about sourcing and what's a reliable source and how do you, determine between sources, even the gray area in that, because I don't think everyone is aligned on every aspect of that, but really creates a beautiful discussion place for children to engage. Because the truth of it is, they're aware of what's going on, and they have questions and comments and opinions, and we can either create space for them to discuss respectfully with care for each other, or we can try to push it to the side. And we don't think that's the right direction. So we try to create a respectful space to discuss the events of our world with each other.
Emily, thank you for that. Shifting gears yet again, we had a couple of questions about whether we're still accepting new students. We are. Not in every grade. Some of our grades are full, but if you have friends or family or additional children who you want to send our way, we'd be thrilled to serve them. And just reach out. Our staff are here ready to help. I'll note enrollment around the city is declining. And as enrollment declines, other charter schools, the city's district schools, everyone's struggling with some enrollment concerns. The more students we have, up to the number we can appropriately serve educationally and with social distancing, the more money we have to ensure that we have enough staff, enough resources, enough program to really take care of your kids in an exceptional way. So absolutely, we still have some room in our schools. Just get in touch if you want more information. about that. Okay, those are the questions, for the most part, that were submitted to us by email in advance of this meeting. Some of you submitted questions that were school-specific. If you were late joining or missed it when I said it earlier, I want to reiterate, school-specific questions we'll be addressing in a memo that we'll send out, a follow-up document next week. So questions, for example, about HLA2's new building, we're going to address those in a written update next week. Similarly, questions about what Regents eligible classes are there at HLA. Stay tuned, we'll get you information about that next week. So at this point, we're going to take a few minutes to try to tackle some of the questions that have come in over the chat. And we're not going to get to all of them. Right? Some of them may be too complex for us to answer right now because we actually need to do some research. Others we may not have time to. And again, some of them may be school specific. We had a question where someone was seeking clarification about summer school and what's happening with summer school. This summer, and probably I won't say this summer only, but this summer we're pivoting away from our traditional school building based summer school program, which has always been available for struggling learners identified by the school, to serving the same children who are struggling academically, with small group tutoring through a partnership that we've built with an organization called Tutored by Teachers. Some of our own teachers are going to be participating in that program under the Tutored by Teachers umbrella. It's going to be small group instead of large classroom based. We think it will be effective. If your child is eligible, you will have already heard from us. And so if you have any questions about that, again, feel free to write to us and we will certainly get back to you. But we have high hopes about that program. It'll be a high dosage for kids in terms of number of hours. And then depending on how that works, we may actually continue that program as a supplement during the coming school year, not during the school day, but in after school context, typically done remotely, meaning by Zoom, to help kids who are really struggling and may need something above and beyond what the classroom teacher is able to offer. We're looking at budget, and we want to see how well the program goes this summer before making that commitment. There were some questions that came in on the chat, and these are similar to questions that I think we've already answered, but I do want to kind of stamp them again. How can we serve kids if there's 3-foot distancing requirement? We are looking really closely at this. Again, a school like HLA2 in particular that has some very small classrooms, we are not going to put more children in the classroom than the classroom can safely accommodate under health and safety guidelines. At the same time, I want to flag, every year, we always start with more kids than are there a couple of weeks later. There's always people who do a little shopping around to different schools, or we start earlier. So unfortunately, some families come to us, I'm not naming names, come to us for like a week because they can have a safe place for their kid to be, and then actually go and roll somewhere else because they never really intended to be with us. So we may have a slight uptick in number of kids, and we'll be creative about how to do that if we face that situation in a very safe manner. But we will not have more children in classrooms than a particular classroom can safely accommodate using the social distancing guidelines. The number of classrooms per grade and per school varies. So if you have questions about your particular school, let us know. We can give you what our estimate will be as to how many classrooms, we call them sections, how many sections of, let's say, kindergarten or second grade or sixth grade. For the most part, most of our grades in most of our schools have 2 classrooms per grade, 2 sections. Some have 3. We've had additional questions come in. I understand this is a source of a lot of anxiety for folks about vaccinations for children. As of now, we are not mandating vaccinations for children. We will never, or at least I should never say never, I cannot imagine that we will ever mandate vaccines for children unless the State Department of Health and the State Department of Education tell us to. So will they do that at some point? I think they probably will. When? I have no idea. Unless and until they do, you're not going to see us mandating vaccinations for children. Dismissal on Fridays. Emily, do you just want to remind folks, I think we said 1 p.m.?
Yep, 1 p.m. for children. So 1 p.m. we'll be opening our doors, our buses will pick up, our students will leave, our staff will stay.
And to be clear, depending on the school that your child attends or will be attending, after school programming, if it exists Monday through Thursday, may be free if the school has the budget room to do that, or may be varying based on family need, or may have various fees associated with it. Fridays, aftercare will be free. Now, there may be add-on programs for Fridays, like, for example, if we offer something really special on a Friday, there may be a cost associated with that. But in terms of your child having a safe, adult-supervised aftercare place to do their homework, to engage with their peers, if you can't do the 1 p.m. Early dismissal or bus transport home, that will be free on Fridays for any family that needs it. Let's see. We have a question from a family that says that they come from a Muslim background and want to know how we deal with Israel education and culture. And, you know, like the questions about things like critical race theory or teaching of complex issues, this is complicated, right? I mean, we are, along with many, deeply saddened by what's been happening in the last weeks around renewed conflict, both in terms of civic unrest and in terms of conflict between Israel and Gaza. And we, above all, as an organization that's founded in these Olam values that we've talked about and in diversity, want people to make peace with each other, to get along, to solve problems together. We do not teach a particular viewpoint about the conflict. We do teach children modern Hebrew. We teach them about the country of Israel in all of its diversity. To give you an example, our 8th grade students had the opportunity to do a week-long trip to Israel. And in doing so, they meet Arab Israelis, Jewish Israelis, Druze Israelis, Israelis from a wide variety of backgrounds and walks of life, and visit lots of different sites in Israel. We are not here as an organization for political purposes. And I think the best analogy would be, we try to teach the study of Israel in the same way we try to teach other social studies topics, in a way that's appropriate to the age and maturity of the children and consistent with our values as an organization. We do it in ways that are probably similar to the way a school that focuses on Arabic as a second language, or Mandarin, or French, like New York French American Charter, which is around the corner for us in Harlem, the way they do it, or at least the way we hope they do it. And again, anyone who has any questions about that, please feel free to get in touch with us directly. I also want to flag, just in case you joined or for some reason didn't get our earlier contact information about this, we have info email addresses for each of the schools: info@hlacharterschool.org, info@hla2.org, and info@harlemhebrewcharter.org. We're going to be sharing those again when we send out additional communications. The recording tonight is going to be shared out in the next few days. And again, we're going to have a follow-up written communication that's school specific, as well as answering these general questions, that you'll all be getting next week. Before we close, Emily, let me turn it back to you briefly.
Great. So I just want to share again how excited we are for the summer. John did talk a bit about this and about how our traditional summer school and the students who would have been served, of course, we always have a summer school programming for our kids who are most at risk and struggling academically, that those children will be serviced by our external partners, tutored by teachers, which is a really wonderful program. It is actually tutored by teachers. So what they do is basically recruit and partner with real teachers across the country, the region, and including a significant bunch of ours, and have those teachers teach during the summer. So we feel great about that. I've been meeting with them. Their curriculum is excellent. And given the fact that we were able to have an outside partner, we've actually been able to expand our criteria a little bit and serve even more kids who are academically at risk and some siblings who are academically at risk, and get them in, because we had a larger teaching force than if we only used our internal staff, which is great. Really also excited for the day camps that John mentioned. We're partnering with a bunch of local day camps. We've done some great subsidy for families. We're hoping that this gives kids more of that in-person socialization in a safe and caring environment that they have missed out on over the past year and a half. We know it's critical. And so we're excited for the families who took us up on that. And for our new families joining us for the camp later this summer, we hope that'll be wonderful. In all of these, we've been able to incorporate a Hebrew component. So kids are going to get a bit of exposure to Hebrew over the summer if they join our camps. It won't just be a joyous, physical outside camp. You'll also get some Hebrew practice, fun, and joy mixed in there as well. And then there's two other components. One, which is a really small select program for some of our families who are our students actually, who are most emotionally at risk and facing some major challenges. And this, we've partnered with Ramapo for Children to send a small group of children to an overnight program this summer for 2 weeks, where they're going to get some great outdoors time and also some great counseling and coping strategies and ways to approach the world as they come back from that. And then for a whole host of other students who might not fall into this extreme category, but who might have gotten counseling during the year through at-risk counseling or counseling through their IEP, all of which are IEPs that we've maintained during this time, our special education support plans, and we'll be maintaining them, of course, this fall as we shift to in person, making sure that all needs are met. But over the summer, we're going to be able to offer counseling for our students, for a pretty significant chunk of students. And for the most part, this is going to be our own Hebrew public counselors who really wanted to continue this work in the summer and who signed on for extra hours. We are compensating them. They're wonderful, but they're going to be able to continue working with our kids who are at risk so that they don't have this gap in counseling and this emotional support.
Emily, thank you. I want to briefly, because questions have continued to flow in, I'm watching them eagerly in the chat. So let me just say, obviously, anyone who's on the call right now, we know we've been going for about 53 minutes. If you need to drop or want to drop, please feel free to do so. I am going to answer a few more questions before we close out. First, there have been a couple of questions about special education and children with special needs. We expect almost all special education services, whether that is something like occupational therapy or speech language therapy, or a so-called ICT teacher, a team teacher who's a special educator in a classroom, we expect all of those services to be available in person, in the building, delivered the way they used to be. If you are one of the small number of families whose child qualifies, which you'll know over the summer, for remote learning, then we will continue to find ways to provide those special education services remotely, for example, through a tele-speech therapy session, as we've been doing in the past. And we'll continue to work in partnership with the Committee on Special Education of the New York City District to provide those services in the highest quality way possible. We had a question about whether we can accommodate children with IEPs. Over 20% of the children in our schools have IEPs. We serve a very large percentage of children with special needs. We're proud of it. That doesn't mean we can serve every single type and severity of disability any more than any other public school can. So there are instances where a particular child cannot be served by us, but we always do our best, work in partnership with the family and the Committee on Special Education to figure that out. And so again, that's an area where if you have questions as a new family, just get in touch with us. We will make sure that you are in turn in touch with people like Natalie Quesada, who's our network level director of special education, or the special education coordinator at your child's school. There were also a couple of questions about the summer programs. Let me just, again, reiterate this. Tutoring, if your child is eligible for tutoring, which you will have already learned of, it's free. It's free because it's just like our summer school program, but we're doing it through this tutoring model. If your child is getting counseling from us or from one of the partners we're providing with, that's free. If your child is interested in, or you're interested in signing your child up for one of our summer camp partnership programs, that cost varies depending on financial need. And people want to know how to get in touch. Please email us at those info ones. We put out a bunch of notices about summer camp, but we know people's inboxes are flooded with information. Again, info@hlacharterschool.org, info@hla2.org, info@harlemhebrewcharter.org. I don't love to get drowned in emails any more than anybody else, but you can email me directly if you want, jon@hebrewpublic.org. I'm going to then take that email and figure out who on my team or who else in our network can answer it for you. If I know the answer, I'll answer it myself. But we really want to make sure that your questions are able to get answered. And look, let me just close by saying, as I said at the beginning, it's been a really hard period of time. I did not, nor did my colleagues, take an opportunity tonight to praise our school staff. They're not on the call today, but our school leaders, our teachers, our social workers, our operations staff, everybody's been working their butts off. And they are probably as fried and frazzled in some ways as you all are. So we're trying to show them love. We really want to be a welcoming community for you and your children. And increasingly, this idea of holding together as a Hebrew public community during these difficult times, while ensuring that your children learn at a high level, build good social lives for themselves and good social skills, and really can go on to be happy and successful out there. That's what we're about. That's what we're going to continue to be about. If you have any questions or concerns, please do just get in touch with us. And we really thank you for your time tonight. Take care, folks. Good night.